Businessman proposes to homeless woman, and her answer leaves him speechless. Julian Vance was down on one knee on the wet sidewalk, holding a small navy blue velvet box, while the heavy March rains battered lower Manhattan. The woman in front of him stared at him with a mixture of shock and indignation, her soaked clothes clinging to her thin body, her dark brown hair plastered to her face by the water streaming down without pause. He had spent weeks searching for her on the streets of lower Manhattan, ever since that Tuesday morning when he first saw her sleeping under the Brooklyn Bridge. Something in those green eyes, even clouded by sadness and exhaustion, had stirred something in him in a way he couldn't explain. Julian had always been a practical man, someone who solved problems with money and contracts. But there he was, soaked to the bone, proposing marriage to a complete stranger. "Have you lost your mind?" she whispered, her hands trembling more from nerves than from the cold. "You don't even know me. I know it might sound crazy, but—" Julian tried to find the right words, feeling the water run down his black hair and drip onto the collar of the dress shirt that was now clinging to his chest. "Ever since I saw you, I can't stop thinking about you. I can take care of you, give you everything you need." The woman let out a bitter laugh that blended with the sound of the rain hitting the asphalt. "Take care of me?" she repeated, and there was something in her voice that sent a chill through Julian that had nothing to do with the early morning cold. "You really don't recognize me, do you?" Julian blinked a few times, trying to get a better look at her face through the little drops of water running down his glasses. There was something familiar about those features, the way she moved her eyebrows when she spoke, but he couldn't place it. Should I know you? My name is Claire Montgomery." Her voice grew firmer, almost cutting. "Claire Montgomery Architecture and Design. I worked for 12 years at the company you bought and shut down in a week, laying off 300 people without any explanation." Julian's world seemed to stop for a moment. The rain kept falling, but he no longer felt the cold soaking his back. The memories came flooding back. The acquisition of the architecture firm 3 years ago, the financial problems he discovered after the purchase, the difficult decision to shut everything down. "You were there?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I wasn't just there. I was the coordinator of the residential projects department. I had a team of 15 people working with me." Claire got up from the ground where she had been sitting against the concrete wall, her legs unsteady from being in the same position for so long. "Do you want to know where they are now? Do you want to know how many of them managed to find another job after you destroyed our company overnight?" Julian felt his stomach churn. He vaguely remembered that department, the reports showing enormous losses, but he had never stopped to think about the specific people who worked there. To him, they had just been numbers on spreadsheets, costs that needed to be cut. I didn't know," he stammered, putting the ring box back into the pocket of his soaked jacket. "Of course you didn't know." Claire wiped her face with the back of her hand, spreading the rainwater even more. "Men like you never know. You buy, shut down, fire, and never look back to see the damage you've left behind." "Claire, do you want to know what happened to me after you closed the company?" she interrupted, taking a step closer to him. "Do you want to know how an architect who graduated from Columbia University with a specialization in urban sustainability ended up sleeping on the street?" Julian couldn't answer. The rain was letting up, but the distant sound of cars on Fifth Avenue created a constant hum that made his head throb. "When you shut down the firm, I was just finishing paying off the apartment I'd bought for myself and my daughter," Claire continued, her voice controlled but heavy with old pain. "I'd been trying to find another job for 2 months living off my savings when my ex-husband decided it was the perfect time to come back and hold me to a debt I didn't even know existed." "What kind of debt?" "He'd taken out loans using my name as a guarantor without my knowledge. When the banks came after the money, I found out I owed nearly $200,000. She let out another bitter laugh. "Do you know how much an unemployed architect makes to pay off $200,000? Julian felt as if someone was squeezing his throat from the inside. He knew exactly the weight of $200,000 of debt, knew how it could destroy an ordinary person's life. The apartment went to the bank, the furniture was auctioned off, and my daughter had to go live with my sister upstate." Claire wiped her face again, but this time Julian noticed it wasn't just raindrops. "I came to New York City to try to start over, But who wants to hire a 40-year-old architect who lost everything and has nowhere to live? Your daughter, how old is she? 17. She's finishing high school in Chicago. She thinks I'm here working on some big project that I'll come get her once I get back on my feet. Claire's voice cracked a little. She has no idea her mother asks for food at restaurant doors and sleeps under the Brooklyn Bridge. Julian felt a pang in his chest, unlike anything he'd ever felt before. It was as if someone were twisting his heart with bare hands. Claire, I had no idea that... That what? That your decisions affected real people, she interrupted him again. That behind every number on your spreadsheets there was someone with a family, dreams, bills to pay. They stared at each other for a few seconds. The rain had stopped completely, but they were both still soaked and shivering. Julian realized he had never really looked at Claire's face when he saw her sleeping on the streets. Now, looking directly at her, he could see the intelligence behind the tired eyes, the dignity she held on to even in the most difficult situation. "Why did you come looking for me?" Claire asked, breaking the silence. "Of all the people you could have chosen for your midlife crisis, why me? I can't explain it." Julian ran his hand through his wet hair, feeling more vulnerable than ever. "There's something about you that stirs me in a way I don't understand." "That's called guilt, Julian." Claire crossed her arms over her chest, trying to shield herself from the cold wind that was starting to blow. "Your conscience is trying to tell you something." "Maybe," he agreed, surprising himself with his honesty. "But it's not just that, there's something more. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter." Claire shook her head firmly. "I would never marry you, not even if you were the last man on earth. You destroyed my life." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Julian stood on the sidewalk for a long time after Claire disappeared into the darkness of Lower Manhattan's streets. The pre-dawn cold cut through his wet clothes, but he barely felt it. Her words echoed in his mind like a siren that wouldn't stop ringing. "You destroyed my life." He had never thought of his employees as real people when making business decisions. To him, they had always been human resources, numbers on reports, costs that needed to be cut when necessary. But now, for the first time, he could put a face and a story behind those numbers. The next day, Julian couldn't focus on any meeting. Sitting in the boardroom of his office in the Upper East Side, he stared out the panoramic window while his partners discussed the acquisition of a new construction company. The voices around him sounded distant, as if they were speaking from inside an aquarium. "Julian?" The voice of his partner, Eleanor Sterling, brought him back to reality. "Are you going to sign the documents or not?" He looked at the papers in front of him. It was the same thing as always. Buy a struggling company, fire unnecessary employees, restructure, resell at a profit. It was what he did best, what had made him a millionaire at 35. "How many employees work there?" he asked. Eleanor checked her papers. 120. We'll keep about 40, 50 at most. The rest is fat that needs to be cut. 70 people being let go, Julian repeated, feeling that strange sensation in his chest again. "It's what we always do, Julian. That's how business works." Eleanor looked at him with concern. "Are you okay? You've seemed a bit off since yesterday." "I'm fine," he lied, pushing the documents back to her. "I'll review this at home. You can make the smaller decisions without me today." Leaving the office, Julian drove straight to Lower Manhattan. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he felt he needed to find Claire again. There was something unfinished between them, something that needed to be resolved. He spent 3 hours driving through the streets of Lower Manhattan, stopping at every place where he had seen homeless people. He asked municipal guards, cleaning workers, street vendors. No one had seen Claire. When he finally gave up and went home, Julian sat on the Italian leather sofa of his penthouse in Tribeca and looked around. Everything was impeccable, expensive, perfect. But for the first time, that environment left him restless instead of proud. He picked up the phone and called his secretary, Brenda. "Brenda, I need you to hire a discreet private investigator. I want to find someone." Of course, Mr. Vance. May I ask what it's about? It's personal, very personal. The next day, Julian was back in Lower Manhattan. This time, instead of driving, he decided to walk the streets, really observing the people he saw. For the first time in his life, he paid attention to the faces, to the stories each expression told. He stopped at a bakery on 42nd Street and bought coffee and bread for a group of people sitting on the steps of a commercial building. They received him with suspicion at first, but after a few minutes they relaxed and started talking. "Do you know a woman named Claire?" Julian asked an older man, who seemed to be an informal leader of the group. Brown hair, green eyes, around 40 years old. "Claire?" The man thought for a moment. "Oh yes, the woman who speaks nicely, who seems educated. She doesn't stay around here much. She's more independent, you know. Doesn't like to mix much." "Do you know where she usually stays?" "Sometimes I see her at the New York Public Library. She goes there to shower and use the internet." The man took a sip of the hot coffee. "Why do you want to know? Are you a relative of hers?" "It's complicated," Julian replied, avoiding going into details. The New York Public Library was a few blocks away. Julian walked slowly, mentally rehearsing what he would say when he found her. But when he got there, Claire was nowhere to be found. He returned for the next 3 days. On Thursday, he finally found her sitting at a table in the back of the library, typing on a public computer. She was wearing the same clothes from the night of the rain, but they were clean, and she had managed to brush her hair. Julian watched from a distance for a few minutes before approaching. Claire was focused on the screen, typing quickly, and he could see she was working on an architecture project. Even there, with no resources, no office, nothing, she was still an architect. "Claire?" She turned around, and for a moment Julian saw fear in her eyes. Then, the fear was replaced by irritation. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you." He pulled up a chair and sat down next to her. "About what happened at your firm." "There's nothing to talk about. Claire saved the file she was working on and closed the program. You did what you did, and I suffered the consequences. End of story." "No, it's not the end of the story." Julian leaned in closer, lowering his voice so as not to disturb the other library patrons. "I looked into your firm after you told me. I read all the reports, all the meeting minutes." Claire stared at him with skepticism, but didn't get up to leave. "And what did you find out that you didn't know before? That the firm wasn't going bankrupt when I bought it?" Julian felt the weight of the words as he said them. "The financial problems were caused by the managing director, who had been embezzling money for 2 years. If I had dug deeper before shutting everything down, if you had dug deeper, you would have found that we had approved projects for the next 5 years. Claire finished the sentence for him. "That we were a profitable company being gutted from within. I shut down a healthy firm and laid off 300 people because I was too lazy to do my homework properly." Julian hung his head, feeling smaller than ever. "Claire, I'm so sorry. More than I could ever put into words." She was silent for a long time, staring at her own hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "You being sorry doesn't give me back the 3 years I lost. It doesn't give me back my daughter's trust, and it doesn't erase the nights I spent wide awake wondering where I went wrong." "I know." Julian nodded. "I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can help you rebuild." "How?" Claire looked him straight in the eye. "Are you going to give me a job out of pity? Treat me like your personal charity case to ease your conscience? No. I want to give you what you rightfully deserve." Julian took a deep breath before continuing. "I want you to be my partner in a new project." Claire let out a skeptical laugh. "Partner? You and me? I'm buying a plot of land in South Brooklyn to build a residential complex. It's a big project, $25 million. Julian pulled some papers from the folder he was carrying. "I need an architect in charge, someone who understands urban sustainability and residential design. And you want that person to be me? You'd be a minority partner. 10% of the project would be yours." He slid the papers across the table. That would be about 2.5 million once it's completed. Claire looked at the documents but didn't touch them. Why should I trust you? Last time you said you were going to help me, you ended up proposing marriage like I was some poor thing who needed saving. Because this time I'm not trying to save you, Julian answered honestly. I'm trying to save myself. They stared at each other for a moment. Julian could see that Claire was fighting an internal battle, weighing the pros and cons of the proposal. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. Julian stood up. Meu cartão está ali nos papéis. Me ligue quando decidir. Ele estava quase saindo da biblioteca quando ouviu a voz dela atrás de si. Julian. Ele se virou. Se eu aceitar, será estritamente profissional. Nenhum pedido de casamento, nenhum envolvimento pessoal, nenhuma tentativa de me salvar. Apenas trabalho. Apenas trabalho. Ele concordou. E eu quero 50%. Se vou arriscar minha reputação trabalhando com você, quero que seja uma sociedade real, não uma caridade disfarçada. Julian sentiu um sorriso se formando no canto de sua boca. Ali estava a mulher forte e inteligente que ele havia entrevisto por baixo do sofrimento. A arquiteta que sabia exatamente quanto valia seu trabalho. 50%. Ele concordou sem hesitar. 3 dias depois, Claire ligou para o escritório de Julian. Brenda transferiu a ligação imediatamente, como ele havia instruído. Eu aceito, ela disse sem preâmbulos. Mas tenho algumas condições. Estou ouvindo. Primeiro, quero um contrato formal assinado por advogados, que deixe claro que sou sócia, não funcionária. Segundo, quero autonomia total sobre as decisões de projeto. Terceiro, se você tentar me tratar como caridade em qualquer momento, eu saio e fico com tudo que já foi desenvolvido até então. Aceito todas as condições. Julian respondeu imediatamente. Quando você pode começar? Agora. Mas vou precisar de um lugar para trabalhar e equipamentos básicos. Você pode usar o escritório. Tem uma sala vazia no andar de cima que pode ser toda sua. Não. Claire foi firme. Quero um escritório separado. 2 sócios independentes. 2 espaços independentes. Julian percebeu que ela estava estabelecendo limites claros desde o início. Era inteligente da parte dela, e ele respeitava isso. Posso alugar um espaço no mesmo prédio, um andar abaixo do meu. Seria conveniente para reuniões, mas manteria nossa independência. Perfeito. Eles marcaram de se encontrar no dia seguinte para assinar os contratos e visitar o terreno. Quando Julian desligou o telefone, sentiu uma mistura de ansiedade e esperança que não sentia há muito tempo. Naquela noite, ele não conseguiu dormir. Ficou acordado olhando para o teto do seu quarto, pensando em como sua vida havia mudado drasticamente em uma semana. Uma semana atrás, ele era um empresário bem-sucedido que tomava decisões frias, baseadas apenas em lucro. Agora, estava prestes a começar uma sociedade com uma mulher que ele havia prejudicado profundamente. Uma mulher que o desafiava de maneiras que nunca havia experimentado. A próxima manhã amanhecia ensolarada quando Julian chegou ao escritório temporário que havia alugado para Claire. Era um espaço pequeno, mas bem iluminado, com vista para a Fifth Avenue. Ele havia mandado instalar uma mesa de desenho profissional, um computador com programas de arquitetura e móveis básicos. Claire chegou pontualmente às 9 horas. Ela usava uma calça social preta e uma camisa branca que, embora não fossem de marca cara, estavam impecavelmente limpas e bem passadas. Julian percebeu que ela havia feito um esforço para se apresentar de forma profissional. Como conseguiu as roupas? Ele perguntou, curioso. Conversei com a irmã de uma amiga que trabalha em uma loja de roupas usadas. Ela me emprestou algumas peças até eu conseguir comprar minhas próprias. Claire olhou ao redor do escritório. Isso deve ter custado uma fortuna. É só até o projeto acabar. Depois você pode montar seu próprio escritório do jeito que quiser. Eles passaram a manhã revisando os contratos com o advogado de Julian. Claire leu cada linha cuidadosamente, fez várias perguntas técnicas e sugeriu algumas modificações que protegiam melhor os direitos dela. Julian ficou impressionado com o conhecimento jurídico que ela demonstrava. Você estudou direito também? Ele perguntou durante uma pausa. Não, mas quando você está indo para a falência, aprende rápido sobre contratos e leis. Claire answered without bitterness in her voice. I had to defend myself alone against banks and lawyers for 2 years. After they signed all the documents, they took Julian's car to visit the land. It was in a prestigious area of South Brooklyn, close to Central Park. It was a large space with several old trees that would need to be preserved. Claire walked the property for almost an hour, taking photos, measuring with a tape measure she had brought, jotting down observations in a notebook. Julian followed her from a distance, watching how she worked. There was total concentration in her movements, a passion for what she did that showed in every gesture. "What are you thinking?" he asked when she finally stopped to rest under a 100-year-old tree. "I'm thinking it would be a crime to build an ordinary building here." Claire pointed to the trees around them. "This place has the potential to be something truly special, something that works in harmony with the nature that already exists." "What kind of thing?" "Sustainable collective housing, apartments that share common spaces, rooftop gardens, a rainwater collection system, solar energy." Her eyes lit up as she spoke. "We can create a model of urban living that other cities will want to copy." Julian sat down on the ground beside her, not caring about dirtying his suit pants. "That's going to cost more to build. But it'll be worth much more when it's finished." Claire opened her notebook and started making a quick sketch. Environmentally conscious people pay a premium for this kind of project, and in the long run the maintenance costs are much lower. As she drew, Julian watched her hands. They were hands that had been through hardship, with a few scratches and calluses, but they moved with a natural elegance across the paper. There was something hypnotic about the way she worked, as if every line in the drawing had a specific purpose. "Did you always know you wanted to be an architect?" he asked. Claire paused her drawing for a moment. "Since I was 10. I grew up in a small house in Chicago, and I was always imagining how it could be remodeled to work better. My father was a bricklayer, so I saw up close how buildings actually worked." She went back to her sketch. "What about you? Did you always want to be a businessman?" "Actually, I studied civil engineering," Julian confessed. "The original idea was to build things, to create projects that would last generations. But I ended up discovering it was easier to make money buying and selling than actually building." "What happened to your engineer side?" "I guess it slowly died, with every deal I made just for profit." Julian picked up a dry leaf from the ground and started spinning it between his fingers. "Until last week, I had completely forgotten that I once wanted to build beautiful things." They worked together for the rest of the afternoon, Claire explaining her ideas while making increasingly detailed sketches. Julian contributed his knowledge of costs and economic feasibility, and found that he enjoyed this conversation more than any business meeting he'd had in years. When the sun started to set, they were sitting on the grass, with Claire's notebook open between them, full of drawings and calculations. "How much time do you need to do the complete project?" Julian asked. 6 months if I work it right, maybe less if I can put together a small team to help with the detailing. Hire whoever you need." Claire looked at him with a serious expression. "Julian, I need you to understand something. When I take this project, I'm not forgiving what you did to me in the past." "I understand. I'm not doing this because you proposed to me in the rain, or because I feel something for you. I'm doing this because it's a professional opportunity I deserve." "I understand perfectly." Julian looked into her eyes. "And I want you to know that I respect that. I respect you." They looked at each other for a moment, and Julian felt that something had changed between them. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't romance, but it was a kind of mutual respect that hadn't existed before. Claire closed her notebook and stood up. "I'll start working on the preliminary drawings tomorrow. Do you want to check on the progress weekly or however you prefer? It's your project now." "Our project," she corrected him. "Partners, remember." Julian smiled. "Our project." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The first weeks of the partnership between Julian and Claire were marked by an almost cold formality. They met twice a week to review the project's progress, always at her office, always with a clear agenda and set schedules. Claire always arrived on time, presented her work in a professional and technical manner, answered Julian's questions, and said goodbye politely. But beneath that professional surface, Julian sensed she was struggling with something deeper. There were moments when he caught her staring out the window with a distant expression, as if she was somewhere else entirely. And sometimes, when she talked about certain aspects of the project, her voice would become tense in a way that had nothing to do with the work itself. It was during the third week that he found out what was going on. It was a Thursday afternoon when the phone in Claire's office rang. She was explaining the details of the rainwater harvesting system to Julian when she answered the call. "Hello?" Her voice changed instantly. "Hi, sweetheart." Julian realized it was her daughter. Discreetly, he pretended to review some papers while listening to the conversation. "No, honey, the project is going well, but it's still going to take a few months," Claire said, and Julian heard the tension in her voice. "Yes, I'm eating properly. Of course I am. How's school?" The conversation continued for a few minutes. Claire asked questions about her classes, her friends, her college plans. Her voice was affectionate, but Julian could sense the effort she was making to sound normal, upbeat, successful. When she hung up, Claire was quiet for a moment, looking at the dark screen of her phone. "Your daughter?" Julian asked gently. "Maya, 17 years old." Claire put her phone away. "She's finishing high school and wants to study medicine. She's a brilliant girl. She doesn't know about your current situation." "No." Claire shook her head firmly. "And she can't know. She thinks I'm here in New York City working on an important project, making good money, establishing myself so she can come for college." "But now it's not exactly a lie," Julian pointed out. "You are working on an important project." "For now," Claire sighed. "This project will end, and then what? I go back to the streets while I wait for another job to come up?" Julian had never thought about that. For him, this project was the first of many they could do together. But for Claire it was a temporary opportunity, with no future guarantees. "Why didn't you bring her here?" he asked. "You can rent an apartment now, with the advance you received." "With what money? The advance barely covers buying proper clothes and work materials." Claire turned to the window. "And even if it did, how do I explain to a 17-year-old girl that her mother spent 3 years living on the streets?" "You're going to tell her eventually." "Am I?" Claire stared at him. "How do you tell a daughter who admired you, who was proud of your profession, that you sank so low you were sleeping under bridges?" The pain in her voice was so intense that Julian felt like hugging her. But he knew any gesture like that would be misinterpreted. "Maya loves you," he said simply. "That isn't going to change because you went through tough times." "Do you have children, Julian?" "No." "Then you don't understand." Claire went back to her drawing table. "When you're a mother, your job isn't just taking care of your child. It's also being someone they can look up to, someone who sets an example. How am I supposed to be an example of anything if I couldn't even take care of myself?" Julian was silent. He truly didn't fully understand, but he could see the weight this carried for her. "Maybe," he began hesitantly, "maybe you can talk to her gradually. You don't have to tell her everything at once." "Maybe," Claire agreed, but her voice didn't sound convinced. They went back to work, but the atmosphere had shifted. For the first time since they'd started working together, Julian saw Claire as something beyond a competent architect or a victim of her past decisions. He saw her as a mother fighting to protect her relationship with her daughter, a woman carrying an emotional burden far heavier than any financial hardship. That night, Julian went home thinking about their conversation. He lived alone in his penthouse, had never felt the need to start a family, was always too focused on work for serious relationships. For the first time, he wondered if he'd lost something important by prioritizing only his career. The next day, he arrived at Claire's office with a different proposal. "What if we expanded our project?" he said without preamble. "What do you mean?" "This residential complex we're designing. What if, instead of selling the units, we created a cooperative housing program?" Claire stopped drawing and looked at him curiously. "Housing cooperative?" Middle-income families who can't afford an apartment on their own, but together can buy and maintain a space, Julian said, sitting in the chair across from her desk. We create a model that other construction companies can replicate in other cities. That would be revolutionary. Claire's eyes began to light up. But it would also be much more complex from a legal and financial standpoint. Complex, but not impossible. Julian opened a folder he'd brought with him. I researched housing cooperatives in other countries. It works very well when it's properly planned. Claire picked up the papers and began to read. As she made her way through them, her expression shifted from curiosity to genuine interest. If we can pull this off, it wouldn't just be a project, she said finally. It would be a whole new company, a new way of doing business. Exactly. A company that would have guaranteed work for years, building similar projects in cities all across the country. And Maya could come study here in New York without me having to worry about whether I'll have work next semester, Claire said, almost in a whisper, as if she didn't want to let hope sound too loud. You could, if you want to. They spent the rest of the week developing the idea. Claire researched the technical aspects of cooperative projects, while Julian studied the economic and legal feasibility. They worked long hours, sometimes late into the night, and gradually the formality between them began to give way to a more natural partnership. It was during one of those late work nights that the first moment of true closeness happened between them. It was almost 10 o'clock on a Friday night. They'd spent 3 hours reviewing cost spreadsheets when Claire closed her laptop with a weary sigh. "My eyes are burning," she complained, rubbing her temples. "Do you want to stop for today?" Julian offered. "No, it's almost done. I just need a break." She got up and walked over to the small refrigerator in the corner of the office. "Want a soda? Please." While Claire grabbed the drinks, Julian watched how she moved. There was a natural grace in her gestures, even when she was tired. She had traded her business attire for jeans and a simple t-shirt during the afternoon, and the more casual look made her seem younger, less guarded. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said when she came back with the sodas. Claire looked at him warily but agreed. "What did you feel when you saw me that night in the rain?" She was silent for a long moment, spinning the soda can between her hands. "Anger," she said finally. "So much anger, but also confusion." "Confusion? You showed up out of nowhere, offering marriage as if that would solve all my problems. It was like you didn't understand anything about me, about my situation, about what I actually needed." She took a sip of her soda, but at the same time there was something in your face, a sincerity I didn't expect. "I really was being sincere," Julian admitted. "Crazy, impulsive, completely inappropriate, but sincere." "Why did you do it?" Claire stared directly at him. "Truly, why does a successful businessman decide to get down on his knees in the street to propose to a stranger?" Julian took his time answering. He had asked himself that question many times over the past few weeks. "Because for the first time in my life I saw someone who made me question everything I thought I knew about myself," he said slowly. "I spent years believing that financial success was the only thing that mattered. And suddenly, I saw a woman who had lost everything material she had, but who still held on to a dignity I never had." "Dignity? You never asked me for anything, even when you were sleeping on the street. You rejected my marriage proposal without hesitating, even knowing I could solve all your financial problems." Julian leaned forward. "I had never met anyone who put principles above convenience." Claire stayed quiet, processing his words. "And now?" she asked. "What do you feel now?" "Respect," Julian answered without hesitation. "Respect and admiration. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." "I don't feel strong," Claire confessed. "Most days I feel like a fraud, a 40-year-old woman pretending she knows what she's doing, trying to hide from everyone that her life completely fell apart." "But you're rebuilding," Julian pointed out. "Brick by brick, you're building a new life. With your help. With my money," he corrected. "But the strength, the talent, the vision, that's all yours." They looked at each other for a moment, and Julian felt that something was shifting between them. It wasn't romantic attraction, at least not mainly that. It was something deeper, a mutual recognition of who they really were beneath the masks they wore for the world. "Claire, can I say something that might be inappropriate?" "Go ahead." "I didn't offer that marriage out of pity," Julian said carefully. "I offered it because even without knowing you, I could see that you were an extraordinary person. I was right about that, but completely wrong about how to approach the situation. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to know that when I see you now, when I work with you, I don't see a former homeless woman I'm helping. I see a competent business partner and a person I genuinely admire." Claire was silent for so long that Julian began to worry he had said something wrong. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "Thank you," she said simply. "I needed to hear that." "Why?" "Because sometimes I still wonder if you're doing all of this out of guilt or pity or to make yourself feel better." Claire looked directly at him. "It's important for me to know that you see me as an equal." "More than an equal," Julian said sincerely. "You have courage I never had." They finished the work that night in a very different atmosphere from the one they'd started in. As Julian was leaving, Claire called out to him, "Julian." "Yes." "Thank you for not giving up on me when I said no to your marriage proposal. Thank you for giving me a chance to know who you really are." The following Saturday, Julian was at home reviewing the contracts for the housing cooperative when his phone rang. It was Claire, and she sounded flustered. "Can you come to the office?" she asked without preamble. "I need to talk to you about something." "Of course. Is everything okay?" "I don't know, maybe. Maybe not." Julian arrived at the office in 15 minutes. Claire was pacing back and forth, holding her phone. "What happened?" "Maya called." Claire stopped walking. "She got a full scholarship to study medicine at Columbia University." "But that's wonderful," Julian smiled. "Congratulations." "It is. It's wonderful." Claire didn't look the least bit happy. "She wants to come to New York next week to look for a place to live and get used to the city before classes start." Julian immediately understood the problem. "And you can't have her stay with you because technically you don't have anywhere to live." "Exactly." Claire sat down heavily in the chair. "I've been sleeping in a cheap boarding house in Lower Manhattan when I have the money. When I don't, I sleep here at the office." "Claire, why didn't you tell me?" "Because it's not your problem," she burst out. "We're partners, not charity." "We can solve this," Julian said calmly. "So you can rent an apartment now with the project money." "What money? I get my share when the project is approved and starts selling. That could take months." Claire stood up again. "And even if I rented something today, how do I explain to Maya where I was living before? She'll want to see my apartment. She'll want to know about my life here." Julian thought for a few moments. "What if you'd been staying at a friend's house temporarily?" "What friend? I don't have friends in New York." "You do now." Julian looked at her seriously. "You can say you were living at my house while you looked for a suitable place for her." Claire stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Are you suggesting I move in with you?" "Temporarily, until you get yourself settled permanently." Julian spoke quickly before she could refuse. "My house has 4 bedrooms. You and Maya can have separate rooms, complete privacy. I travel a lot, so most of the time you'd have the place to yourselves." "This is insane." "Why? We're partners, friends. It's not that strange for one person to help another temporarily." "And Maya, how do I explain my situation to her?" "You don't need to explain anything beyond what's true." Julian stepped closer to her. "You came to New York to work on an important project. You met a partner who became a friend and who offered you a place to stay temporarily while you got settled. Now you're looking for a permanent apartment for when she starts college." Claire stared at him, clearly trying to find holes in the story. "And then? When we have to move out? When the project works out and you move, it'll be because you chose to have your own home, not because you were forced to leave mine." Julian gently held her arm. "Claire, let me help. Not as charity, but as one friend helping another. I don't know. Think about Maya. She earned a scholarship to Columbia University. She's living her dream. You can't let your current circumstances get in the way of that." Claire stayed silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was broken. "Why are you doing this? Why are you willing to have two strangers living in your house?" Julian thought about the answer for a few seconds. "Because you're not a stranger. And because maybe I need you both more than you need me." "What do you mean?" "You've seen how I live, Claire. A giant empty house, no real relationships, no family." Julian looked out the window. "Maybe it's time I found out what it's like to have people who genuinely care about you around." "Are you sure?" "I am. But there's one condition." Claire looked at him with suspicion. "What condition?" "You cook." Julian smiled. "Because I only know how to make instant ramen and order food through apps." For the first time in weeks, Claire truly smiled. "I can live with that." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Maya's arrival completely changed the dynamic of the house. Julian was nervous on the morning she was due to arrive, tidying the living room for the 10th time and checking that there was enough food in the fridge. Claire had moved in 3 days earlier, and even in those few days the house already felt different. There were flowers on the tables, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the sound of someone moving through the rooms. When the taxi pulled up at the entrance, Julian watched from the office window. A tall, slim girl got out of the car, looking up at the house in awe. She had the same green eyes as her mother, but her hair was lighter, almost blonde. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a simple t-shirt, but there was something in her posture that conveyed confidence and intelligence. Claire ran to hug her daughter, and Julian felt something tighten in his chest seeing the emotion on her face. It was the first time he'd seen Claire genuinely happy since he'd met her. "Mom!" Maya shouted, running into Claire's arms. "Wow, what a beautiful house. Your friend must be pretty successful." "He is," Claire replied, glancing quickly at the window where she knew Julian was watching. "He's a good man." Julian waited a few minutes before coming down to introduce himself. When he finally came downstairs, he found mother and daughter in the living room, Maya looking around with obvious curiosity. "Maya, this is Julian." Claire made the introductions. "Julian, this is my daughter, Maya." "Nice to meet you, Maya." Julian extended his hand, but Maya surprised him by giving him a hug. "Thank you for letting us stay here," she said sincerely. "It must be strange having two strangers invade your home." "Actually, it's been really nice having you both here," Julian answered honestly. "The house feels too empty with just me." Maya had the same perceptive intelligence as her mother. During lunch, she asked several questions about the work Julian and Claire were doing together, about how they'd met, about the housing cooperative project. "So you're basically inventing a new way to build homes?" she asked, clearly interested. "Not inventing, perfecting," Claire corrected. "The idea of housing cooperatives already exists, but we're adapting it to the Brazilian reality. And it's going to work." "We'll find out," Julian smiled. "Your mother is brilliant, so I believe it will." Maya watched their interaction closely, and Julian wondered what she was thinking. After lunch, Claire showed Maya her room and they talked for hours. Julian listened to them laughing upstairs while he worked in the office and realized he had missed that sound of domestic life. Late in the afternoon, Maya came down alone and found Julian in the kitchen making coffee. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, serious. "Of course." Julian poured a cup for her too. "What's on your mind?" Maya sat down at the kitchen table and studied him for a few moments before speaking. "My mother isn't telling the whole truth, is she?" Julian almost dropped his cup. The girl was even more perceptive than he had imagined. "Why do you think that?" "Some things don't add up." Maya counted on her fingers. "First, my mother has always been very independent. She never accepted help from anyone, even when she needed it. But she's living in the house of a man she met a few weeks ago. Maybe she's changed. Second, she's thinner than she was the last time we saw each other, and she has worry lines on her face that weren't there before," Maya continued. "Third, all her clothes are new, even her underwear. I saw her unpacking in the bedroom." Julian realized that trying to deceive Maya would be a mistake. The girl was too smart and knew her mother too well. "What exactly do you want to know?" "The truth." Maya stared at him directly. "My mother went through hard times, didn't she? Serious hard times." Julian took a deep breath. Claire wouldn't like this conversation at all, but he felt Maya deserved honesty. "Yes, she went through serious hard times." "What kind of hard times?" "I think that's a conversation you should have with your mother, not with me." "I already tried. She changes the subject whenever I ask about the last few years." Maya took a sip of her coffee. "Please, I need to know so I can help her." Julian wrestled with himself for a few moments. Finally, he decided to tell an edited version of the truth. "Your mother lost her job a few years ago when the company she worked for shut down. Because of that, she ended up with huge debts and lost the apartment where you two lived. And she went through a very difficult time before landing this project with us. She had to live in precarious conditions." Maya was silent, processing the information. "When you say precarious..." "Maya, your mother is a proud woman. She doesn't want you to know what she went through because she doesn't want you to feel guilty or responsible. She was living on the street." Maya said it not as a question but as a statement. Julian didn't answer, but his expression must have confirmed her suspicion. "For how long?" "That's something you really need to ask her." Maya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. When she turned around again, there were tears in her eyes. "Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she ask for help?" "Because she loves you," Julian said gently, "and because she wanted to protect you from feeling responsible for something that wasn't your fault." "But I am responsible," Maya burst out. "If I hadn't gone to live with my aunt, if I had stayed with her, you would have ended up on the street too." Julian interrupted her. "And that would have destroyed your mother completely. Knowing you were safe and studying was the only thing that gave her the strength to keep fighting." Maya sat down again, wiping her tears. "How did you two really meet?" Julian hesitated. Telling her about the marriage proposal in the rain could complicate things even more. "I saw her in a difficult situation and offered to help. She refused at first, but we ended up talking, and I found out she was an architect. The rest you already know." "You like her?" It wasn't a question, it was an observation. Julian felt himself blush. "Your mother is an extraordinary person." "That's not what I asked." Maya stared at him with the same intensity as Claire. "You like her, romantically." Julian took a moment to answer. "Yes, but it's complicated." "Because of what happened in her past?" "Because of what I did in her past," Julian corrected. "I owned the company that went under and caused all of her problems." Maya's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really, so you understand why the situation is complicated?" "I do." Maya became thoughtful. "But you're trying to make up for what you did wrong." "I'm trying, but making up for something isn't the same as undoing it." "Does my mom know you like her?" "I don't know. Maybe she suspects. But I made it clear that our relationship is strictly professional." "And what if it weren't?" Julian looked at the girl, surprised by the maturity of her questions. "Maya, you're 17. You shouldn't be worried about your mom's love life. My mom spent 3 years alone, fighting to survive, protecting my dreams even when it cost her her own." Maya leaned forward. "If there's someone who can make her happy, I want to know. And what if that someone is the person who caused all of her problems?" "Then it depends on whether that person learned from their mistakes and whether they truly care about her." Maya stared at him directly. "Have you learned?" "Every day," Julian answered sincerely. "And do you care about her?" "More than I should." Maya smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "Then maybe things can work out." That night, during dinner, Maya confronted Claire directly. "Mum, I know you've been through some serious hardships these past few years." Claire stopped with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Maya, you don't need to lie to protect me. I'm not a child anymore." Maya took her mother's hand. "Julian told me some things, but I want to hear it from you." Claire shot a reproachful look at Julian, who shrank into his chair. "She's more perceptive than you think," he defended himself. "She was starting to suspect anyway." "Mom, please." Maya squeezed Claire's hand. "I need to know the truth." Claire was silent for a long time. When she finally began to speak, her voice was low and controlled. "After I lost my job, things got very hard very fast. Your father showed up with debts in my name that I didn't even know existed. We lost the apartment, the furniture, everything. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were studying, preparing for your college entrance exams. It was the most important moment of your academic life." Claire looked directly at her daughter. "If I had told you, you would have dropped everything to try to help me." "I should have dropped everything." "No," Claire was firm. "You should have done exactly what you did. Study, earn your scholarship, build your future. That's what gave me the strength to keep going." "But you were alone? I survived," Claire interrupted her. "And I wasn't completely alone. Your aunt helped when she could, and I always knew you were safe and happy." Maya was openly crying now. "I should have noticed. In the phone calls, in the way you talked. You shouldn't have noticed anything. My job as your mother was to protect you, and that's what I did." Claire stood up and hugged her daughter. "And now things are getting better. We have this project, we have this new beginning. But what if it doesn't work out? What if the project fails?" "It will work." Claire looked at Julian. "Because now I have a partner who believes in me as much as I believe in this project." Julian felt something tighten in his chest hearing those words. It was the first time Claire had expressed trust in him publicly. "And then?" Maya asked. "After the project? We'll see. Maybe we'll have our own firm. Maybe we'll do other projects together." Claire looked at Julian again. "Maybe we've discovered something worth building together." There was something in the way she said those words that made Julian wonder if she was talking only about business. After dinner, while Maya chatted on the phone with friends from Chicago, Julian and Claire stepped out into the garden. "Did you tell her about the proposal?" Claire asked. "No." Julian shook his head. "I thought it would overcomplicate things." "Thank you." They walked in silence for a few minutes. "She asked questions about you." "What kind of questions?" "Whether you're single, whether you're trustworthy, whether I like you." Claire smiled slightly. "Concerned daughter things." "And what did you say?" "That you're a good man who made mistakes in the past but is trying to make things right." Claire stopped near the fountain in the center of the garden. "And that I trust you professionally." "Only professionally?" Claire stared at him for a moment. "Julian, you know our situation is complicated." "I know. But that doesn't change the fact that—" He hesitated. "That what?" "That I care about you more than I should, given our history." "And you think I don't know that?" Claire laughed softly. "You think I don't notice the way you look at me sometimes, how you worry when I'm tired, how you always make a point of asking if I need anything?" Julian felt exposed. "I tried to keep things professional. I know, and I appreciate that." Claire stepped closer to him. "But Julian, we have to be realistic about where this could lead." "Where do you think it could lead? Honestly?" "I don't know." She sighed. "You hurt me deeply, even without knowing it, and at the same time, you're helping me rebuild my life in a way no one else would. And is that good or bad?" "It's confusing." Claire laughed. "It's very confusing." They stood close to each other, listening to the sound of the fountain water. Julian felt the urge to touch her, to kiss her, but he knew it would be inappropriate. "Claire, I want you to know that I have no expectations," he said finally. "No matter what I feel, I'm not going to push you into anything beyond what you're comfortable with." "I know." She touched his arm briefly. "And that's why maybe in the future, once things settle down, once Maya is in college and our partnership is solidified, maybe we can talk about this again. Maybe. Maybe." She smiled. "But for now, let's focus on the project and on giving Maya a good life during her college years. Deal." They walked back inside in silence, but there was something different in the air between them. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was the possibility of romance. And for the first time since they'd met, that possibility didn't seem frightening. The following week, Maya applied to Columbia University and began exploring New York City. She quickly adapted to the household routine, helping with chores and showing genuine interest in the housing cooperative project. "Can I help with anything?" she asked one day, finding Julian and Claire working at the dining table, which they had temporarily turned into a meeting table. "Do you know anything about spreadsheets?" Julian asked. "I'm good with math and computers." Julian and Claire exchanged glances. Having extra help would be useful, and Maya was clearly bored. "How about helping us organize the market research?" Claire suggested. "We need to map out how many families in the region would be interested in cooperative housing." Maya lit up immediately. "I can make phone calls, send out questionnaires, create charts. I love that kind of stuff." And that was how Maya became the third member of the team. She showed impressive organizational skills and an analytical ability that surprised both adults. "She has a talent for management," Julian commented to Claire one night after Maya had gone to bed. "You're sure she wants to go into medicine?" "She's always said she wanted to go into medicine," Claire replied, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. "Why do you ask?" "Because she seems genuinely excited about our project. She asks questions about the real estate market, about project management, about financial feasibility." Julian pointed to the spreadsheets Maya had organized. "And she's good at it." Claire looked at the colorful, well-organized charts her daughter had created. "Maybe we should talk to her about it, not to influence her decision, but to make sure she's choosing medicine because she really wants to, not because she thought it was the only prestigious option." Over the weekend, the three of them took a trip to see a cooperative housing project that was working in Portland. Maya was fascinated by the way the community organized itself, how families made collective decisions about renovations and improvements, how there was a sense of belonging that went beyond simple ownership. "It's like a small neighborhood within the city," she commented during lunch. "Everyone knows each other, takes care of each other's kids, shares resources." "That's exactly it," Claire confirmed. "The idea is to build community, not just provide housing." "And do you think that would work in New York City?" "With adaptations, yes," Julian replied. "New York City has many families who earn enough to afford collective financing, but not enough to buy on their own in well-located neighborhoods." During the trip back, Maya was quiet, looking out the window and clearly thinking. When they were getting close to New York City, she finally spoke. "Can I make a confession?" "Of course," Claire replied. "I always said I wanted to go into medicine because I thought it was the most respected profession, the one that would make you most proud." Maya looked at her mother. "But after seeing your project, understanding how it can change people's lives—" "What are you trying to say?" Claire asked gently. "That maybe I wanted to study business administration or urban planning, something that would let me work on projects like this one." Maya turned to face both of them. "But I'm afraid of disappointing you." Claire turned fully on the seat to look at her daughter. "Maya, the only thing that would disappoint me would be you choosing a career to please others instead of following your passion. But medicine is medicine. It's prestige, it's financial security. And business administration focused on social projects is the chance to change the world," Julian interjected. "Maya, you're 18. You have time to change your mind as many times as you want. Can I think about it?" "You can, and you should." Claire took her daughter's hand. "And know that, whatever your decision, I'll support it completely." That night, after Maya had gone to sleep, Julian and Claire sat in the garden to talk about the day. "She's a special girl," Julian said. "She is," Claire agreed. "And she's growing up making her own decisions. Sometimes I forget she's no longer the child I left in Chicago." "You did an incredible job raising her." "We did," Claire corrected. "My sister, my ex-brother-in-law, the whole family helped." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "Julian, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Did you ever want to have children?" Julian thought for a few moments. "I never stopped to think about it seriously. I've always been so focused on work, on business." He looked toward the house where Maya was probably studying. "But seeing you with Maya, seeing what it's like to have a real family, it makes you think." And what do you think? That maybe I missed out on something important by prioritizing only my career. Julian turned to look at Claire. What about you? Do you want more children? I always have. Sophia. Maya used to ask for a little brother when she was younger. Claire smiled sadly. But circumstances were never favorable, and now what? Now she's growing up, heading off to college. Is there still time to start over? Claire, you're 40 years old. Of course there's time. 40 years old and then some problems. She laughed softly. I'm not exactly what you'd call a great catch on the marriage market. Any intelligent man would see you as the best possible catch, Julian said sincerely. Claire looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Julian. Sorry. He stood up quickly. That wasn't meant to sound like a pickup line. It was just honesty. You don't need to apologize for honesty. Claire stood up too. And it didn't sound like a pickup line. It sounded like affection. They stared at each other for a moment, and Julian felt something shifting between them again. Slowly, he reached out his hand, and Claire took it. Claire, I know it's early to talk about this. I know our situation is complicated, but I want you to know that when I think about the future, you're in it. He squeezed her hand gently. You and Maya. Claire was silent for so long that Julian started to regret having spoken. When she finally answered, her voice was low. I think about that sometimes too, she admitted, and it scares me. Why? Because the last time I believed in someone completely, when I let my guard down and trusted another person with my life, I ended up sleeping under the Brooklyn Bridge. Claire let go of his hand. I don't know if I could survive another disappointment like that. I understand, Julian said gently, and I won't push, but I want you to know that I'm different from your ex-husband. How can you be so sure? Because he abandoned you when things got hard. Julian looked directly at her. I found you when things were already hard and I chose to stay. Claire looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, Julian saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the possibility of love. It was hope. Can we take it slow? She asked. As slow as you need, Julian promised. And let's see how things develop naturally. Naturally? Claire stepped closer to him, and, to Julian's surprise, gently kissed him on the cheek. Good night, Julian. Good night, Claire. As she walked into the house, Julian stayed in the garden for a few more minutes, touching the cheek where she had kissed him. For the first time since he'd met her, he felt that there was a real possibility of a future between them. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be quick, but it would be possible. And that was enough for now.